adaptation has failed. So now you have to adapt towards it. The fifth one is more of that climate change is not about future. It's happening now. And all the models like CPAT, then the RAN, and all these economic forecastings that we are doing, I think we have to talk about nowcasting, that what is happening now and how it affects people at the moment. The last proposition is that we think, like we come up with these mantras that think global, act local and all that, and we think that if the countries which are doing independently in terms of that, what are the best possible adaptation solution, and if a country X is applying it and country Y is doing it as per own conditions, the problem of climate change is going to be solved. It's not going to be solved. So we need a very comprehensive, collaborative approach where all the countries join hands together and focusing on an integrated approach rather than thinking that what we are doing in Pakistan and what is happening in Bangladesh, and if they are doing their own steps and we are doing our own steps, that is going to solve this global problem. It is not going to solve it. So we need a better, robust approach where everyone is together in it.
Isn't it a very ideal one?
When you have to look for the abstract and then you come to the theoretical concept, you come to the practical concept. It is very much ideal, but I'm not saying it is impossible. Being humans as social animals, they don't act in silo or in independence. Once you have a common cause, you are sitting in an examination. If you don't know any question, you always ask your fellow, and they collaborate. So if you have a common cause, you always collaborate. So therefore, now coming on to the question that was, what has been the role of the donor? I think first we need to look into what is happening within the country. And the best financial picture that can be drawn are your federal and your provincial budgets. You can see that is climate change a priority or not?
But your colleagues at this moment, thank you for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to be a part of this very important discussion. So, going back to the question, both private sector and communities have a huge role to play in this entire framework. Because private sector has the responsibility of, first of all, mitigating and addressing the impact of climate change by contributing less to the factors that lead to these disasters. And communities also have the responsibility to take the ownership of this engagement and getting the measures implemented at their level. In terms of financing, the discourse starts from the very beginning, from the outset when the post-crisis needs assessment or disaster needs assessments are done. That is when we start engaging with the private sector and the communities because they know the solutions. And in our work as World Bank and Islamic Relief is engaged extensively in Pakistan and even in Afghanistan, we see that the private sector is now stepping in for the public sector to provide solutions around nutrition, around healthcare, around even education, because they are the users of technology. And in these areas that are typically vulnerable to fragility and instability and also climate change, the state's capacity or the public sector capacity is getting constrained. There's only so much they can do. So then we need to rely on private sector and a partnership between the private sector and the communities. So they started forming the policy dialogue, starting from the needs assessment. And then there are ways you can mobilize financing for all of this to happen. There are development partners, bilaterals, multilaterals. The private sector's own corporate social responsibility resources are there. But that's in case of the huge corporates. And we've seen the FMCGs and other big corporates now stepping in.
Pretty much in the deep end as part of the discussion is concerned, I'll reflect on my experience across Asia and some of this across comes to Pakistan. We know that climate change impacts people who live in extreme poverty, the most vulnerable the most. And so it's from that perspective, any solution to climate change has to be informed by the experiences and the priorities of local communities. And of course, when we say local community, this includes households, it includes schools, it includes religious places of worship, it includes local government, includes every member of the community. So it's really important any climate change solution really looks at the solution not from a single perspective, but as a wider ecosystem, looking at how do we build resilience all the way from household level, then to community level, and of course strengthening local government, as we mentioned, but then also ensuring the policy framework at the national level, all tied in together with a coherent approach to climate financing. Again, as Amity, we work across the disaster-affected communities across the globe, of course in Asia. It's one of the most impacted regions globally when it comes to disasters. Of course, all the communities we're working are very much in need of a scaled-up solution to climate change. There's been many initiatives taken by whether it's governments or civil society, which have been piloting initiatives.
Mr. Nathan.
Thank you very much. And first of all, very much appreciate the invitation. Thank you very much to 𝒊𝒏𝒕 and the 𝒊𝒏𝑰𝒃 for inviting us and inviting me to join this esteemed panel and this program. So very happy to see this program and indeed the projects, highlights of the projects. As you know, 𝑹𝑨𝑷𝑰𝑫 is a proud sponsor of 𝒊𝒏𝒃 through our earlier National Disaster Risk Management Fund project, and continue to engage with 𝒊𝒏𝒃 on a number of issues, including on policy areas. With that, thank you for the question, and I think it's certainly a timely one, and we can, I guess, respond in two separate ways. One is we know that Pakistan is one of the, in a sense, the pioneers in terms of setting up policies with regards to climate action, adaptation, but in many ways, much of that has been lacking in terms of implementation. I believe Pakistan was one of the earliest countries to indeed set up a Ministry of Climate Change and establish a climate change plan and policy. But again, implementation was often lacking, again also with the National Flood Protection Plan. When we reflect back on what has been the issues, I think they're in a way common to many of these plans and perhaps known to many of you who have been working in this area for long. And I perhaps would answer this in looking at three different areas. One is in terms of, and perhaps taking a lens with more recent work. The first issue is around the bankable projects. We know that it is difficult to establish not only seek investment, but also use that investment effectively. And the world is becoming much more competitive in regards to climate finance. The adaptation needs and mitigation needs are growing. And Pakistan is now among many countries in dire need of increased financing for adaptation and mitigation. What that means and what it means is that the quality and the eligibility of those projects needs to now more closely align with the types of climate finance sources. Often that means more integrated projects that look at community, projects that integrate gender issues and inclusiveness more carefully. From our perspective and on our experience, not only through our own projects and in the 𝒊𝒏𝒃, we know that there's an issue around stakeholder engagement that's important. We have to know that there's a clear ownership of the project. And it's important that, in our experience, that there needs to be some support to help prepare projects, to help proponents prepare those projects. Now that there's a much more difficult, more competitive environment to prepare and implement projects. The next is on climate finance coordination. So it's one thing, of course, to have to identify those sources, but we now know that there are many different sources, and in fact that is particularly important because we have this federal and provincial connection in terms of how finance is sought and projects are implemented. That can be often disjointed, and you see that here in terms of how projects are being sought from the provincial level and coordinated at the federal level. And from our perspective, that is a key bottleneck with regards to how many of these plans are then financed and implemented, and has stopped quite a bit of implementation, or hindered quite a bit of implementation. And finally is the need for improved implementation capacity. Again, it's one thing to seek projects, seek finance, obtain finance. It's another option to implement projects. And Islamic Relief has really highlighted some of those key issues and some of those more vulnerable but often difficult areas like the economy, where we're engaging in communities that have many different facets to address, not only just the adaptation issue that we're looking at. And then it's, of course, the monitoring and evaluation of those programs to ensure that you are consistent with the broader program. Like I mentioned, ADB has a new proposed climate and disaster resilience enhancement program. It's a broad policy-based program. It's a policy-based one, which is unique for us with regards to climate, but it's something we've done quite regularly in public finance. But we felt that policy coherence and policy trajectory is deeply important with regards to implementation of climate and disaster resilience issues, as much so as it is in terms of just the nuts and bolts of the projects themselves. So we're working with Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Climate Change, NDRMF, NDMA, and many other agencies to develop a policy part. First program of prior actions have now been completed, and we're looking now to take that to the board. We have a sequence of agreed actions across all agencies that will be implemented out to 2030. And that gives a long, so we say, timeline for us to anchor our engagement with respect to our investments, ensuring that each of our investments and our engagement is tied to a...
But the question is, how do we transition to make our resident communities? Just before coming here, I was sitting there, and I saw this beautiful footage of Islamic Relief efforts, that how are they going to work in the area and some most wonderful areas where floods predominantly was a threat to their lives and livelihoods. So this is exactly, the measures and the things we have to do to raise resilient communities. And so, for that sake, a lot of my perspectives would sound like, repetition to what we have been seeing and hearing this morning. But to respond directly to your question, I would say there are many factors, but maybe a few I can touch upon here. First and foremost, I think, is to empower and strengthen local capacities. And when I say local capacities, it essentially means local government institutions as well as local communities, because this second part of society is mostly ignored while we are going for planning or implementing disaster resilience projects. We do our plan is mostly at the federal, provincial, local level, but almost most of the time, you'll see that those communities have not been part of those efforts. So I think this is high time that we adopt this bottom-to-top approach and include them in all these processes. So we have to strengthen the capacities in terms of providing them with equipment and trainings on disaster relief, emergency response and recovery efforts, and train them how to respond in those real times when such disasters hit. And I think this is important because if we do not prepare the communities, they always will be the most vulnerable population. They will always be the basic victims of these disasters. So I think there is no time left that we just do preparation at the federal, provincial level, and the project implementation, and communities just be in the basic victims. So I think one, we have to empower them with the requisite skills and training and